D-Generation X was announced as the headline attraction for this year's WWE Hall of Fame class. Triple H, Shawn Michaels, X-Pac, Road Dogg, Billy Gunn, and yes, Chyna will all be inducted together Saturday, April 6th. That's at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. This makes Shawn Michaels a two-time Hall of Famer. Michaels was already inducted back in 2011. Look, if Bret Hart does go in for the second time this year, you knew that Shawn was going in too. I mean, that should have been a no-brainer. For Triple H, this will be his first induction officially, which I think is stupid. I think a big name like him should get their own solo induction first. Then if they want to do faction inductions, he could go in again later on. So this one just feels like it's ass backwards. But, look, they need names. They need to sell tickets. They need an attraction. DX is an attraction. Waltman is a worthy entry, I think, from his early days in Global, I think it was, as the Lightning Kid. He made a name for himself. He was doing some pretty innovative stuff for that time, and it got him noticed. It got him a job in WWE at a time when there really were not very many people who looked like him. Today, he'd be in NXT, and nobody would think twice about it. That match with Razor Ramon on Raw in '93, the first one they had, not the rematch where he almost killed himself on a dive out of the ring. That match is one of the all-time greatest upsets in wrestling history. That's how you do an upset. That's how you work an angle like that. They did that to perfection. They made him a name. They made him a star in one night. They made that kid a star. He had a solid run there through the early part of '96. Went to WCW. He was part of the NWO. He did benefit from being friends with all those guys, Hall and Nash and Triple H, But I don't want to sit here and say the only reason that he became a name in the business is because of who he was friends with. It certainly helped, but I think to say that would take away from the fact that he was a talented guy who did benefit, but he was a talented guy who I think would have done, pretty well for himself either way. But yes, absolutely, he benefited from who his pals were, and he was part of two of the biggest factions in the history of the business. He was part of the NWO, and he was part of DX. That doesn't happen unless he's pals and buddies with those guys. He came back to WWE in '98 at a very opportune time when the company was finally starting to turn the tide against WCW, and he became a very big key part of the Attitude Era. He was one of those characters, those character performers. He wasn't a top guy in the company. But then after you get past Austin, Rock, Foley, Undertaker, Kane, and Triple H, then you start getting into the other cast of characters that people remember as being important pieces of that Attitude Era. And you think of the New Age Outlaws. You think of X-Pac. You think of Chyna. You think of The Godfather. You think of, different people like that who gained a lot of fame and notoriety, and maybe they were only a mid-card act in some cases, but boy, everybody was over back then. It felt like everybody was over. Everybody had a gimmick or a character or a story of some kind, and it was just the product was so hot that, and they were a little looser, obviously, with what they could get away with on TV. Just everybody felt like a star. So he really, benefited from that as well. He came back. He joined the second iteration of DX. I don't think we're going to be getting any footage of him dressed in blackface as Mark Henry at the ceremony. I think they'll conveniently, lose that footage. There's also his partnership with Kane, which I was a big fan of. I loved the Kane and X-Pac tag team. He got Kane to speak his very first words on TV without the voice box. The Outlaws, one of the great teams in company history. Also a very big part of what people remember from that Attitude Era time period. They tried a singles push with Billy Gunn. Boy, did they try. He won the King of the Ring. Yeah, later on he won the IC title. They had big plans for him. It just didn't work. It did not work. His best run was as part of DX as one of the New Age Outlaws. And even later, he did well as part of another tag team on SmackDown. Him and Chuck, Billy and Chuck. So, Billy had way more success as a tag team wrestler than he did as a single. Road Dogg actually had a run with the Hardcore title. That was very brief, but memorable for me. I was a fan of it. If I remember correct, I think he won the championship think he beat Al Snow with a pile driver outside the arena in the snow, if I'm remembering correctly. I do miss those hardcore title defenses. That was one of my guilty pleasures of that era. And then there's Chyna. Chyna finally gets her recognition in the Hall of Fame that I know people have been clamoring for years. People already in other circles bitching. What else is new? Bitching about her not going in on her own. Look, Triple H did an interview this week and flat out said that he thinks Chyna deserves one day to go in on her own. So they're not closing the door. It is possible that it could happen. But even if it does, it probably isn't happening for a long time. If you're one of these people who desperately wanted to see Chyna in the Hall of Fame and desperately wanted to see her get that recognition that you feel she deserved that she wasn't getting, be happy. She's going in. Enjoy it. Savor it. And guess what? She's going to have 5 other people on that stage saying nice things about her instead of just one. I remember her debut, attacking Marlena out of the crowd, and I think it was the next night on Raw, and he's ragdolling her around. And when the product got real hot in 98 into 99, she was one of the hottest acts in the entire company. Chyna was just beyond popular. More so than even a lot of the men were. Now, I think Sable was a bigger star in terms of the women. Or when you think back to that period, stars of the Attitude Era, I would argue that for a time there, Sable was a bigger star than Chyna was. She really was the only woman more popular than Chyna at that time. But Chyna at one point was the number 1 contender for the WWF title. Heading into SummerSlam in 99, she was, for at least a week, the number 1 contender for the WWF Championship. She lost her shot on television to Mankind. Mankind went to SummerSlam instead, and then they ended up doing a triple threat. But again, for at least a week on TV, they were promoting a title match between Chyna and Stone Cold Steve Austin. What a match that would have been. But that's how big of a deal that this woman was at that time. And when she passed away, Austin on his podcast was really broken up about it. And he was saying, look, her going into the Hall of Fame one day isn't enough. This is what Austin said. They could put her in the Hall of Fame one day, and that still won't be enough to honor her. He said it wasn't right that she would go in one day only after she died because she couldn't be there to enjoy it. Someone should have told him what Triple H said about searching for her on Google. What about the kids, Steve? What about the kids? I hope they don't Google Sean Waltman and some of the shit that he did. Actual shit, too. Literal shit. She became the first woman to ever win the Intercontinental Championship, became the first woman to win the IC title twice, first woman ever to enter the Royal Rumble match. She did not leave the company on the best of terms. I think that is safe to say. She ended up in New Japan for a brief stint. One of the only women ever, maybe the only woman ever, to compete inside of a New Japan ring. Maybe, again, I can't be sure about that. Maybe at some point they had some kind of a women's match as some kind of attraction. But as far as I know, she's certainly one of the only women to ever set foot in a New Japan ring, aside from whoever, whatever lady Yujiro brings to the ring with him. And yeah, I know this Hall of Fame induction really is focused on her. Obviously, they're not going to mention any of this. And I know that this Hall of Fame induction is really focused and centered on her time as a member of DX. But since she may never get another induction and they ain't going to mention New Japan anyway, I think it's worth mentioning, her entire career here, because I don't know that too many people even know that she wrestled in New Japan. Not only did she wrestle matches in New Japan, she wrestled this young guy named Tanahashi. I don't know. I think he may have gone on to have a decent career. But if you ever want to see something truly bizarre, just like a very bizarre sight, it's up on Dailymotion. I would imagine it's up also on New Japan World if you have a subscription. There was a tag team match in 2002. So while Ruthless Aggression was going on in WWE, in 2002, this was months before Big Papa Pump made his big debut at the Survivor Series. There was a match in New Japan pitting the Steiner brothers. So you got Big Papa Pump looking like as only he can, but he's back to teaming with his brother, against the team of Hiroshi Tanahashi and Kensuke Sasaki at the Tokyo Dome. And Chyna is the special guest referee for that match. What a weird scene that was the first time I saw it. I just brought it up again last night. I'm looking at this. and Chyna's the referee. I'm like, how did this ever happen? How did this ever happen? It's just very weird to watch. We all know about this woman's addictions. We all know that she's been a mess. She's been a train wreck in the past at different points. She's been on reality shows and a lot of embarrassing situations for her. And look, it's worth noting she lobbed some very serious accusations against Triple H, claiming that he hit her, he physically abused her, and even worse, against Sean Waltman. She lobbed some pretty serious accusations against both of them. At a time when it seemed like her head wasn't on straight, who's to say whether it's true or not? But now that seed has been planted, right? We can never be sure if it happened or not. And imagine if you're Triple H, if it never happened, now this accusation is out there forever that you physically abused somebody. If I were him, I'd be pretty upset about that. But she did. She tried to, she was trying to get her life together before she died, it seemed. It's a shame what happened to her. I mean, as far as the accusations and all that stuff, look, it's not hard to see why WWE would want nothing to do with this woman. It's sad on the one hand, but on the other hand, when she's out there saying the things that she was saying about, this guy's going to run the company one day, and you're making these kinds of accusations against him without any kind of proof. I never heard that story before. It's like out of the blue, all of a sudden, there's this story out there. You can understand why the company would want to distance itself from somebody like that. But she was trying to get her life together later on, and for all of her demons and all of her issues and addictions, she did seem, underneath all of that, she seemed like a genuinely nice person. And Mick Foley and all these people who ever interacted with her would say the same thing. They knew the real Joni, and she was such a wonderful woman, and it makes it even sadder what happened to her. The fact is, all that stuff, all the bad stuff too, it doesn't minimize her role and the impact that she had on DX. As popular an act as that was in the company, a big part of that was Chyna. You cannot put DX in the Hall of Fame without including Chyna. And there have been multiple versions of DX over the years. I hated the later ones with Triple H and Shawn Michaels. I mean, some of the backstage segments were amusing that they did. I laughed at a few of them, but that PG, like 2006 or whatever, 2009 version of DX, that was a channel changer for me. I never liked that. My favorite version was the post-WrestleMania 14 version 2, I guess, of DX, where Triple H took over and X-Pac joined and they had the Outlaws in there. It was Triple H, X-Pac, the Outlaws, and Chyna. That was my favorite incarnation of DX. One of the greatest factions of all time. In fact, I had them in number 3. Late last year, I did my list of the top 10 factions of all time, and I had DX at number 3 when I ranked them. I had DX behind only the NWO and the Four Horsemen in the number 1 spot. That's pretty good company to be in, I would say.